As with most emotional and psychological issues, understanding tends to be the antidote to the issue, and yet there's so much about the process of grieving that gets misunderstood. In today's video, I'm once again chatting with celebrity hypnotherapist and grief expert Dipti Tait, and she explains the 6 main things that people don't realise about grief, but really need to. Let's get into it. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Tim Box. I'm a mind coach, and for more than a decade now, I've been helping people overcome all sorts of emotional and psychological issues, and in particular, helping people get control of their anxiety levels. But today, we're talking once again about grief, and in particular, some of the many ways we misunderstand the grieving process. If you saw my last video, you'll know that hypnotherapist Dipti Tait is an expert in the area of grief. And the other day, I got her to take me through the most important things we get wrong about grief and how getting them right can help us go through that process that none of us want to go through, but we're all at some point going to have to. I'm going to link in the description to Dipti's YouTube channel and her 2 books on the subject, so be sure to click those links to find out more. But without further ado, here's the interview. Dipti Tait, welcome back to my channel. Good to see you.
Hi, hello Tim. How's it going?
It feels like almost seconds since we saw each other. Okay, so we're here to talk about, so we're joking around, but it's a very serious topic we're going to talk about. We're talking about grief, and this video is all about things that we didn't know about grief that is going to be a benefit to us to understand when we're going through that process, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, for those of you that don't know, Dipti is talking to us because she literally wrote the book on grief. You can get it. I'll put the link to the book in the comments below. Good Grief by Dipti Tait. And there's you have a second book as well, don't you?
I do. I can show you. Planet Grief.
Planet Grief. I'm going to put the link to both of those in the comments below, in the description of the video, so that anyone watching this video that values the ideas we're going to discuss can pick up a copy of both of them. Right, let's get straight into it then, Dipti. We're going to talk about things that people don't know about grief. Fire away.
Okay, so basically grief isn't just about death. It's actually about life. Wow. That's one of my major mission statements, and a lot of people don't realize they associate grief with bereavement and death and loss in that way, but actually there's so much in life that doesn't help us feel good and then causes us grief.
Are we talking about like completely separate to when we lose somebody, as in a bereavement, as in, so like it could be loss of a job, loss of a partner, loss of our lifestyle, things like that, but also those elements come into play as well, I suppose, when we lose a person, because life suddenly, the life we had with them, or the interact, suddenly life has changed in that way, hasn't it?
Yeah, so basically it's any significant loss and any significant change. So it doesn't have to be related to death. So it could be any type of, well, I sort of describe it in any breakdown, any breakup, or any break apart. Perfect. So it's basically any type of heartbreak. That is grief.
Yeah. So if we're going through this process, we don't need to feel guilty about feeling like we're going through a grieving period when, it's only because I've only lost my job, though. It's not the end, it's not life or death. But of course, we then end up grieving the loss of that aspect of our life, don't we?
Yes, and because we don't label it, I'm not a fan of labels normally and ordinarily. I'm really not a fan of labels, but I'm really a big fan of the grief label, because when we label something as grief, we can then kind of understand it, appropriately deal with it, and know that we're not going mad and we're not losing it, and it's absolutely okay to feel the overwhelming feelings that go along with grief. So it could be even things that, the reason why I discovered this for myself was when I was born and brought up in London, so I'm a Londoner. You can't take London out of the girl, they say. And then when I moved to the Cotswolds, I thought, on paper, this is idyllic, countryside, like shops closing at 5 p.m. and everything going dark and no road signs anywhere, and like cows in the street, and you're like, this sounds great. After about 6 months of living in the Cotswolds, I started to feel like, I don't know, like this desperate homesickness.
Oh.
And even though I wasn't homesick because I had a home, because we have a home in the Cotswolds,
Yeah.
and I have a family, but there was just this homesickness, kind of like I didn't belong on the planet anymore.
Oh, wow.
And this desperate feeling of isolation and loneliness and anxiety and just fear and paralysis. And then I was like, wait a minute, I felt like this when my parents died.
Wow.
But they've died. I've grieved. I'm kind of not over it, but something's changed here. And then I realized I was grieving London.
Wow.
And London hasn't died. It's still there. So that's when I realized that grief wasn't just actually associated to death.
That's really important. I mean, I'm always talking to people about it's okay to feel how you feel, and you don't need to second guess or question those feelings. It's, we want to improve our responses. We want to get over the difficult times, certainly. But realizing that going through a process is okay as well. No matter how, I know sometimes we label what we're going through as trivial compared to what other people are going through or something like that. But of course, it's not how it would appear to others. It's how it's presenting to us that's important, isn't it?
It's subjective, isn't it? And we can only feel what we feel, and our feelings are irrelevant, and, they are important and they do matter.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, number 2, grief itself isn't a thing.
Yeah, it's not. Because if you think about grief, it is so many things. It's not just one thing. It's a combination of different types of feelings. So it could be anxiety, it could be loneliness, it could be fear, it could be paralysis, it could be inadequacy and confusion, homesickness, like I mentioned.
Yeah.
And if you kind of lump them all together, it's not like there's a cocktail of grief. It's almost like everyone's got their own personal cocktail.
I see this a lot of people judging the emotions they've got as if there's a right or a wrong thing they should be feeling. People say, oh, grief, I should just be feeling sadness. And then of course you get the client who has lost somebody who they never got to say the things they needed to say. So there's a bit of them feeling anger about having that taken away from them. And then, of course, they feel guilt because, I shouldn't be angry. I should be sad, shouldn't I? And all that sort of thing. Yeah.
And shame. And there's just so much stuff. But we know it's guilt because it's literally emotional overwhelm. And, it's like we have a stress bucket in our head. Actually, I have a prop, but it's over there. So I forgot to bring it over here.
We're imagining a bucket, are we?
Imagine your bucket, and it's got stress in it, and that's your hippocampus in the brain. And what happens when we're grieving is, like, say the balls of normal everyday stress are this big. Grief ball is this big. So what it does, it plops into the bucket. So those little balls spill out. And that's where we're losing our control that we normally would have. It's because all the little things that we would normally deal with appropriately kind of spill out of our stress bucket because grief has now taken precedence, and therefore we can't handle that email that's just come in, or we can't handle I don't know, the child getting told off at school, or the school run taking a little bit longer than it should, or someone cutting us up on the motorway, and we lose it because the grief has taken over our bucket, basically.
We only have a limited amount of resources, don't we? And if it's all being taken up on this one focal point,
and I talk about that stress bucket like a cup of coffee. I can bring a cup of coffee into every type of conversation anyway. So imagine a cup of coffee and a massive sugar lump, and the sugar lump has sort of dropped into the coffee, and grief is the sugar lump, and that hot coffee has already started to dissolve the sugar lump. That's basically what happens when we're grieving. We can't get it back out again. It's in there, and it's now sweetening our life.
Sweetening, cool. No, that's a really, I think that's a great thing to point out, is that, again, it comes back to that subjective thing, doesn't it, in terms of what we go through individually when it comes to grief. Okay, number 3, everyone is grieving.
And that goes back to us as human beings, all kind of go along our lives, expecting this to happen tomorrow because it happened yesterday. We have a lot of patterns that we kind of rehearse and go through. So any type of change, significant change, or any type of loss or any type of heartbreak, like I've mentioned, so a breakdown, break up, break apart, will mean that there's a kind of hole in our life. And that hole sits there. And I think grief comes to repair the hole. That's how it feels to me.
Yeah.
So grief is like the W for the hole and makes us whole again.
Oh, yeah, nice.
I know, that's a good one, isn't it?
That's a good one. I like that one. Yeah. We experience grief in good times as well as bad times.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because that's not what people would normally think. So, for example, walking down the aisle, you've chosen to get married, you're really happy about this, but you are at some level grieving. So, if it's a female who is giving up their surname, for example, they could be grieving that part of their identity.
Wow.
It's a name, it's your name, it's your identity, and then you are giving it up because society says you need to for some reason, or you decide you want to because that's kind of what society says you should do.
Yeah.
But you don't realize actually that is a grieving process.
Yeah.
Another example, becoming a parent. So, that's a good thing. You've got a baby, yippee, we should be so excited about this. But then actually now we're a parent, we're a mum, we're a dad. We have different agendas now. We have different responsibilities. We're not the same person. So you're absolutely beginning to grieve that person that wasn't a parent as you're moving into a new phase. So every time you move into a new phase, it will bring good things. It will bring not so good things, but you're always grieving that part of yourself.
Yeah, so every new opportunity, every process you go through that creates a new part of your life, you grieve the death of the previous version of you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually. And I think it can explain why people often feel very confused by those next steps. They get everything they ever wanted or something, in terms of they get the big promotion or they achieve the big goal, but then there's a little bit of them that for some reason doesn't feel right about it. It almost feels like it's uncomfortable to do that,
And that is actually grief. So once you label that, then you can almost dismiss it because it's not like the same amount of loss and change. You've kind of signed up for that thing, obviously, but at least you can know why there's that feeling of there's not quite right.
I get what you're saying when you're saying you can almost dismiss it. It's almost like understanding, okay, that explains this confusion of feelings that I've got. It allows you to not have to pay too much attention to it because, okay, that's obviously coming with the territory. That's part of the process. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
And that's really self-awareness, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay, this next one, I feel is potentially contentious, or one that I know I can get kicked back on when I talk about this sort of stuff, because we're referring to medication here in terms of grief. Okay, this is how we worded it when we summarized it, when we had a chat. You don't need meds, you can't delete or resist it, right? Yeah. So give me the explanation of that.
So quite often people might go to the doctors when they're grieving for depression, for example, and the doctors may prescribe them antidepressants, which obviously I'm not saying don't take antidepressants, but I'm saying depression is part of the grieving process.
Yes.
So yes, you are depressed, but you might not need to medicate it if you know that it will pass, because it's part of the grieving process.
Yeah.
I explain to my clients that, there's a sort of biological reason for depression. If we think of the primitive brain, the brain is trying its hardest to keep us safe. It's always looking out for us. So whenever some kind of trauma or loss or change happens, it's always trying to accommodate for that. So a bit like the fuse box in the house, if there's too much of a current going through, a fuse will trip, and then you'll lose a couple of lights here and there, and then all you have to do is like trip the switches again, and then everything comes back again. But what that mechanism has done is prevented the fire, so the house isn't going to burn down. So in a way, what grief is doing is it's tripping some switches.
Yeah.
So if your fuse box blows, you don't necessarily have to call an electrician. You just need to know where the fuse box is and re-click the switches. This is the same sort of system. You might not need to get actually medicated for that. You just need to understand the process. So that's really what I mean. I'm not saying you don't need to go to the doctors and you don't need to get help.
I think you're right here, because obviously we always have to caveat with our clients that we're not medical people. We're not qualified to prescribe or unprescribe you from medications. But I think it's interesting what you're saying there, because you'll see this with when people are prescribed antidepressants when they're going through the grieving process. There's sort of like a time limit where the medical profession will allow you to be, down or sad for a certain amount of time. But if it goes beyond that, then they'll start to regard you as clinically depressed or something like that. They'll start to say there's something wrong with you rather than you're going through this difficult process right now. And I think I remember when we were talking about this before, and you were like, well, there's no point in artificially changing the way you feel, because how do you know where you are in the process if your feelings are not your own, and that sort of thing. And that resonated with me when you said that, because I feel like if we're just going to, we have something horrible happen to us that we had no strategies on board for, like you say, some of the fuses were blowing, and then, but all we're being told is there's something wrong with you because of the way you're reacting to this, rather than, this is a completely healthy, understandable, and to be encouraged part of the process of getting the other side of grief,
Yeah. And depression is a way of kind of getting your strength back, really, because it's kind of keeping you in the cave, is that's kind of what it was biologically doing when we were cave women. Not that I'm that old, but when we were cave women and cavemen, it was depressing our system. When you depress your chemicals, and that's one of the things that depression does, you're then not interacting, and you're not going out there, and you're not trying to do everything, and you're not trying to scoop everyone else up. You're actually, going into hedgehog mode, because you need that. You need to rebuild, you need to repair, you need to replenish, you need to sleep. So it's actually that hibernation mode is kind of telling your body and brain to self-care. And that's essentially what depression is doing for the system.
And I think as well, it's important, isn't it, that when we talk about stages of grief, because I know probably people watching this video have read a lot about stages of grief or talked about it, but it's like there's not really a time limit on each of those stages, or even a structured order to those stages. It's just what we might observe the effects of loss being on our system, Cool. Okay, we're at the last one. Time is not a healer.
So we know that time isn't a healer, because if it was only time, then, and if someone stayed in their, say, depressed cave for 10 years without managing it and processing it, they'll still be in the cave. Like you say, it goes into clinical depression. So if time was a healer, they would have come out of the cave on their own.
Without any process needing to be done.
So time is only a healer when you put the right process into that time. And that process is so individual. There isn't a right or wrong process either for everybody. And that's why it can be a bit of a minefield. Do I read a book? Do I watch a video? Do I go to therapy? Do I get a new partner? I don't know, whatever. It's so individual. And that's probably where talking to a clinician or a grief therapist is going to be useful, because they will help you, like, for example, ask the yes principle. They'll help you identify what it is that will be right for you.
I think it's important to recognize that even though it is time does
create, space from things that have happened, but
Yeah.
it is about doing the work, isn't it? And sometimes we're doing the work and we don't even realize we're doing it. We just feel like we're mired going nowhere, when actually our mind is doing some valuable processing, and getting us in a different place. I think you hear this, don't you, when people talk about, oh, and then one day I woke up and I had a certain thought in my head, or something had changed about my perspective. It's almost like their subconscious was doing a little bit of valuable work on the matter without them consciously focusing on it at that point.
The subconscious is a genius, it really is. That's where our wisdom is. And, that's why we're both into working with it, because when we can work with it in that way, why wouldn't we want to do that? It's so much part of who we are and what we are and how we're made up.
Yeah.
It's like, it's that magic part of us that we really need to, learn to work with.
Learn to tap into. And exactly. Dipti, thanks so much for breaking these things down for us today. Where can people find you? Are you on social media? Have you got a website?
Yes.
How can people find your wisdom?
No, well, I have a website, and that's just my name. It's diptitait.com. On Twitter as Hypnotherapy.
Brilliant.
That's about it, really.
You have an app though as well, don't you? As I
Oh, yes, I do. I have an app, and that's just called Dipti. And on my app, I put fresh new content on every month, and it's a hypnotic meditation app. Yeah.
Lovely stuff. There you go. So everyone watching this video, go and find Dipti on all her social media, and get a copy of at least one of those books if you're going through the grief process. I'll put the links to everything in the description. But once again, Dipti, thanks so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and tap into all the things, all your knowledge. And it's been awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me, Tim.
So I really enjoyed chatting with Dipti this week, and it was great to get her perspective on this topic. It's got me thinking that perhaps I should do more interviews on this channel with other professionals. What do you guys think? Is there someone you'd like me to chat with, or a topic other than anxiety you'd like me to cover? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Before you head off, don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with others, and before you go, why not subscribe to the channel for more regular anxiety advice? Don't forget, you can join me live on this channel every Friday evening at 6 p.m. London time when I do a live anxiety Q&A. You can also now become a member of this channel and get access to hours of extra content and exclusive members-only live sessions. Just click the join button on the main page. But that's it for now. I'm Tim Box. Always remember to be kind to your mind, and I'll see you next time.